They say she's just basic security, stationed far from where decisions matter. In her reflective vest, she blends into the background of the busy airfield, ignored by passing officers. But when a decorated four-star general steps onto the tarmac and his eyes meet hers across the runway, something unexpected happens. His cane slips from his grip, clattering against the concrete. Because years ago, in a war no one acknowledges, she led the team that rescued him from certain death. And now, their worlds are about to collide again. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you enjoy stories about unsung heroes and moments of recognition, consider subscribing to our channel for more powerful narratives about extraordinary people hiding in plain sight. Margaret Maggie Chen stood on the scorching tarmac, her orange reflective vest absorbing the midday sun like a sponge. Around her, the military airbase hummed with activity. Transport planes taxiing, ground crews scurrying between hangars, officers striding purposefully toward important meetings. She adjusted her vest and checked her watch. 1,400 hours. 4 more hours until her shift ended. Unlike the uniformed personnel rushing past her, Maggie's only identifier was the bright vest and a small ID badge clipped to her chest. No rank insignia, no unit patches, just another civilian contractor performing basic security duties. Most days, she felt invisible. Most days, that was exactly the point. "Hey Chen, try not to fall asleep standing up today," called a young security officer, his voice carrying across the tarmac. The two colleagues walking beside him snickered as they passed. Maggie merely nodded, her expression revealing nothing. At 42, she was at least 15 years older than most of the security staff. They saw her as the quiet woman who somehow failed at a real military career and ended up in this dead-end position. Their mockery had become routine background noise, like the distant roar of jet engines. She returned to scanning the perimeter, her eyes methodically sweeping across hangars, personnel, and vehicles with practiced precision. While other security staff checked their phones when supervisors weren't looking, Maggie maintained her vigilance. Her posture remained perfect, back straight, weight evenly distributed, hands clasped behind her, a habit that had survived years of military discipline. A lieutenant from the Air Force Security Forces rushed past, bumping into her shoulder without acknowledging the collision. Maggie absorbed the impact, shifting back into position without complaint. The officer never looked back, too important for such courtesies. At the daily security briefing that morning, Chief Warrant Officer Daniels had barely glanced her way while assigning positions. "Chen, you're on the far perimeter again. Keep the area clear of unauthorized personnel." The prime assignments went to officers with connections, or those Daniels wanted to impress, never to the quiet woman in the corner who never complained. The sun beat down relentlessly as Maggie patrolled her designated area. Other security personnel gathered in shaded spots, complaining about the heat. Maggie maintained her route, pausing only briefly to take small sips from her water bottle. Her attention suddenly sharpened. A maintenance vehicle was approaching Hangar 7, an area requiring special clearance. The driver wasn't displaying the proper identification, and the vehicle didn't match any on today's scheduled maintenance roster. Maggie keyed her radio. "Possible security breach at Hangar 7. Unauthorized maintenance vehicle approaching restricted area. Over." "Stand down, Chen," came the immediate response from her supervisor, Staff Sergeant Jenkins. "That's scheduled maintenance. Return to patrol." Maggie watched as the vehicle continued toward the hangar. Something wasn't right. The driver seemed hesitant, looking around too frequently. She noted the license plate and continued her patrol, but kept the vehicle in her peripheral vision. 3 minutes later, Staff Sergeant Jenkins himself rushed toward the vehicle, waving it to a stop just before it reached the hangar doors. He pulled the driver aside, checking identification and making a call on his radio. "Security breach intercepted at Hangar 7, Jenkins announced over the shared channel. "Unauthorized personnel attempted to access restricted area. Situation contained." The base security office immediately responded. "Good catch, Jenkins. Bring the suspect in for questioning." Maggie's expression remained neutral as she continued her patrol. This wasn't the first time her observations had been dismissed, only to be proven correct minutes later. It wouldn't be the last. As she adjusted her vest, the sleeve of her uniform shirt rode up slightly, revealing an unusual scar on her wrist. A jagged line that suggested it hadn't been treated by a surgeon, but had somehow healed remarkably well. She quickly covered it and continued her rounds. Hours passed with nothing more exciting than redirecting a few lost delivery drivers and checking badges at her checkpoint. The mundane nature of the work didn't bother Maggie. There was a certain peace in routine, in being underestimated, in being invisible. At the 4-hour mark of her shift, the base loudspeaker system crackled to life. Attention all personnel. VIP arrival scheduled for 1800 hours. All security positions at heightened alert. Department heads report to Conference Room Alpha for briefing. The announcement sent ripples of activity across the base. VIP visits were uncommon at this installation, which primarily served as a logistics hub rather than a command center. Security officers who had been lounging in the shade suddenly found reasons to look busy. Officers who normally ignored security protocols started demanding stricter adherence. Chief Daniels gathered the security team 30 minutes later. "Listen up, people. We've got General William Hayes arriving at 1800 for an overnight visit. 4-star general, decorated war hero, currently advising the Joint Chiefs. Everything needs to be perfect." He pointed to a base map. "Foster, Rodriguez, you'll be at the main entrance. Peterson, Alvarez, you're on the command building perimeter. Jenkins will coordinate the immediate security detail for the general's quarters." He continued assigning positions, working his way down to the least desirable locations. "Chen, you're at Checkpoint 7. Keep the northeast perimeter clear." Checkpoint 7 was the furthest position from the landing zone, a position usually reserved for the least trusted personnel. It was a clear message about where Chen stood in the hierarchy. A few of the younger officers exchanged smirks. Maggie acknowledged the assignment with a nod and left to prepare. She didn't need special instructions or reminders about protocol. Unlike many of her colleagues, she had read every security manual for the base, memorized every procedure, and knew every contingency plan. As she walked to her position, one of the younger officers, Foster, called out to her, "Hey Chen, don't get too excited about your front row seat to history." His companions laughed as they continued toward their more prestigious positions. Maggie reached Checkpoint 7 and assumed her post, immediately scanning not just her assigned sector, but the entire visible perimeter. While her assignment kept her far from the action, it also gave her an excellent vantage point to observe the entire arrival area without being noticed herself. From her position, she watched as the base transformed for the VIP arrival. The honor guard assembled, practiced their movements twice, and then positioned themselves near the landing area. Senior officers emerged from the administration building, uniforms impeccable, medals gleaming in the late afternoon sun. Maggie continued her vigilant observation, noting a maintenance worker approaching a restricted area without proper identification displayed. She quietly intercepted and redirected them without creating a scene or embarrassing them publicly. The worker thanked her and quickly moved to the appropriate area. Base Commander Colonel Richards strode across the tarmac, flanked by his executive officer and several aides reviewing last-minute details for greeting the distinguished visitor. "Everything needs to be perfect," he insisted loudly enough for nearby personnel to hear. "General Hayes doesn't make casual visits. There's something important happening here." At the mention of the name, something shifted in Maggie's demeanor. Her posture, already perfect, became somehow more alert. Her eyes, constantly scanning the perimeter, gained a new intensity. Anyone watching closely might have noticed the change, but no one was watching Chen. As the appointed hour approached, security personnel throughout the base checked and rechecked their positions and protocols. Despite strict orders to maintain posts, many found excuses to position themselves where they might glimpse the arriving dignitaries. Maggie remained at her assigned checkpoint, professional to the core, but her attention had sharpened noticeably. At precisely 17:55 hours, the distant sound of approaching vehicles caught her attention. The convoy was arriving early, a common security practice to avoid predictability. 3 black SUVs with government plates approached the main gate, passed through without stopping, and headed toward the reception area. From her distant position, Maggie had a clear line of sight to the main vehicle as it pulled to a stop. The base commander and his staff stood at attention, waiting as the vehicles parked in precise formation. Security personnel formed a loose perimeter, and the honor guard stood ready. The doors of the trailing vehicles opened first, revealing security personnel in plain clothes who quickly scanned the area before nodding to the driver of the middle SUV. When that door finally opened, a tall, silver-haired man emerged slowly, the afternoon sun glinting off the stars on his shoulders. General William Hayes stood with the straight-backed posture of a lifetime soldier, his chest decorated with rows of service medals. In his right hand, he gripped a polished wooden cane, the only concession to whatever injury had necessitated it. His face was deeply lined but commanding, his gaze sharp and assessing as he surveyed his surroundings. The base leadership approached with crisp salutes, which the general returned before extending his hand to Colonel Richards. They exchanged words that couldn't be heard from Maggie's position, but the body language suggested respect and familiarity. As the welcoming committee engaged in formal pleasantries, Maggie maintained her vigilant watch of the perimeter, but her gaze returned frequently to the distinguished visitor, studying him with an intensity that would have seemed inappropriate had anyone noticed. A junior officer approached her position. "Chen, command wants a radio check from all positions." Maggie nodded and keyed her radio. "Checkpoint 7, radio check complete. Perimeter secure." The officer gave a cursory glance around her position and moved on without further acknowledgement. Maggie returned to her observation, noting that the formal greeting was concluding. The general was now being escorted toward the administration building, surrounded by his own security detail and the base leadership. Just before the group reached the building entrance, General Hayes paused and turned, his gaze sweeping across the base as if searching for something. For a brief moment, his eyes seemed to lock on Maggie's distant position. She remained perfectly still, her expression neutral, even as a flutter of recognition passed through her chest. The general turned back to Colonel Richards, said something that made the colonel nod emphatically, and then continued into the building. The moment, if it had been a moment at all, passed without anyone noticing the silent exchange between the four-star general and the woman in the orange vest standing alone at the base perimeter. Maggie checked her watch. 18:10 hours. The VIP had arrived safely. Her shift would end in 30 minutes, and tomorrow would likely bring another day of being invisible. That suited her perfectly. Invisibility was her armor, her protection, her purpose. As the sun began to set over the airbase, casting long shadows across the tarmac, Maggie Chen continued her vigilant watch. A guardian no one recognized, a sentinel no one appreciated, a ghost with a purpose no one suspected. Maggie arrived at work the next morning to find the base buzzing with anticipation. General Hayes would be conducting inspections throughout the day before departing that evening. Security had been doubled, with additional personnel brought in from neighboring installations. At the morning briefing, Chief Daniels was unusually tense. "The general has requested a full security demonstration this afternoon. Each checkpoint will be evaluated for response time and protocol adherence. This is not a drill, people. This is our reputation on the line." His gaze swept over the assembled security team, lingering briefly on Maggie. "Chen, you're still at checkpoint 7. The general's schedule doesn't include the northeast perimeter, so you probably won't see any action. Just maintain standard protocols." One of the younger officers snickered. Someone whispered, "Another day in paradise for Chen." Maggie accepted her assignment without comment and headed to her post. The day promised to be even hotter than yesterday, and she had packed extra water in her small backpack. As she walked, she noticed increased activity throughout the base. Personnel in dress uniforms hurrying between buildings, maintenance crews touching up paint on door frames, groundskeepers trimming every blade of grass to perfection. When she reached checkpoint 7, she found her relief officer eager to leave. "Nothing to report," he said, already walking away. "Just some maintenance guys checking the perimeter fence about an hour ago." Maggie frowned slightly. Was that scheduled maintenance? The officer shrugged without stopping. "Didn't ask, they had badges." After he left, Maggie immediately conducted a thorough inspection of the perimeter fence in her sector. 20 minutes later, she found what she was looking for: a small, nearly invisible device attached to a fence post, expertly camouflaged to match the metal. Not base security equipment, not authorized. She studied it without touching, noting its position and design. A surveillance device, likely monitoring movement along this supposedly unimportant section of the perimeter. She left it in place but adjusted her patrol route to pass by more frequently. By mid-morning, the temperature had climbed to uncomfortable levels. Most security personnel had retreated to shaded positions, but Maggie maintained her patrol, methodically covering every corner of her assigned area. From her position, she could see the command building where General Hayes was meeting with senior staff. Her radio crackled. "All security positions, be advised, VIP movement in 10 minutes. The general will be touring the flight line facilities. All checkpoints maintain heightened alert. Maggie acknowledged the transmission and continued her patrol. Her checkpoint was far from the flight line. She wouldn't see the general's entourage, yet she found herself checking her watch more frequently than usual. At precisely 1100 hours, she observed the general's convoy departing the command building, heading toward the main hangars. Even at this distance, she could make out the tall figure of General Hayes, still striking in his full-dress uniform. As the morning progressed, Maggie noticed something unusual. The general's tour seemed to be working its way around the perimeter of the base in a clockwise pattern, checkpoint by checkpoint. According to the security channel chatter, he was asking detailed questions at each position, reviewing protocols, inspecting equipment. "He's grilling everyone," came Jenkins' voice over the radio to another officer. "Asked Rodriguez about response procedures for 3 different scenarios. Better review your protocols." Maggie didn't need to review. She knew every procedure by heart. Still, she felt a strange tension building as the general's entourage continued its methodical circuit of the base perimeter. By her calculations, they would reach her position shortly before the end of her shift, if they continued the pattern. At 1400 hours, her radio crackled again. "Chen, this is Daniels. The general's inspection tour is approaching your sector. Stand by." Maggie acknowledged the transmission, straightened her vest, and maintained her position at the checkpoint. In the distance, she could see the convoy of black SUVs making its way along the perimeter road, stopping at each checkpoint. They were still 2 checkpoints away. About 30 minutes, she estimated. A maintenance truck approached her checkpoint from inside the base perimeter. The driver showed his ID, properly displayed this time, and explained he needed to check the communications equipment at the nearby relay station. "Authorization code?" Maggie asked calmly. The man seemed startled by the question. "I don't have one. I'm just doing routine maintenance." "The relay station requires a daily authorization code for all maintenance personnel," Maggie stated. "Without it, I can't allow access." The man frowned. "Look, I've been doing this job for 5 years. No one has ever asked me for a code." "Then you've been accessing the station improperly for 5 years," Maggie replied evenly. "I can call for a security supervisor to verify if you'd like." The maintenance worker stared at her for a long moment, then sighed. "Fine, I'll go get the paperwork from my supervisor." He put the truck in reverse and drove away, casting an irritated glance in her rearview mirror. Maggie watched him go, then keyed her radio. "Security command, Chen at checkpoint 7. Be advised, maintenance worker attempted to access the relay station without proper authorization code. Individual departed when challenged. Vehicle license plate Alpha 739er Delta." "Copy that, Chen," came the surprised response. "We'll look into it." 20 minutes later, her radio crackled again. "Chen, this is security command. That maintenance worker wasn't on today's schedule. We've issued an alert. Good catch." Maggie acknowledged without emotion, but she was already focusing on the approaching convoy. The general's entourage had reached checkpoint 6, just down the perimeter from her position. Through her binoculars, she could see General Hayes speaking with the officer stationed there. As she waited, Maggie performed another scan of her sector. The surveillance device she'd spotted earlier was still in place. She made a mental note of its exact position, planning to report it after the general's inspection passed. Finally, the convoy pulled up to her checkpoint. Colonel Richards exited the lead vehicle first, followed by Chief Daniels, both men looking tense. They approached Maggie, who stood at perfect attention. "Officer Chen," Colonel Richards said stiffly, "General Hayes will be inspecting this checkpoint. Please be prepared to answer any questions about security protocols for this sector." Maggie nodded. "Yes, sir." The door of the middle SUV opened, and General Hayes emerged, leaning slightly on his cane. Up close, his presence was even more commanding than it had appeared at a distance. His uniform was immaculate, his posture military straight, despite whatever injury necessitated the cane. His eyes, bright blue and intensely focused, immediately fixed on Maggie. For a heartbeat, something flickered across his face, so quick that anyone not watching closely would have missed it. Recognition, certainly, but also something deeper, something like shock, carefully controlled. "Officer Chen," Colonel Richards began the introduction. "This is General William Hayes. General, this is Margaret Chen, one of our perimeter security officers." The general extended his hand. "Officer Chen." Maggie shook his hand with precise formality. "General Hayes, welcome to Checkpoint 7. His grip was firm, his gaze unwavering. "Tell me about this sector, Officer Chen. What are your security concerns here?" "Three primary concerns, sir," Maggie answered without hesitation. "First, the relay station 50 meters to the east contains communications equipment for the entire eastern sector of the base. Second, this perimeter faces undeveloped land that provides potential cover for approach. Third, the fence line here has a slight depression that requires additional monitoring during rainy conditions." The general nodded, his expression unreadable. "And your response protocols if you detect an intrusion?" Maggie detailed the protocols precisely, adding contingency procedures that most security officers wouldn't have memorized. Throughout her explanation, the general watched her with an intensity that made Colonel Richards shift uncomfortably. "Impressive," the general said when she finished. He turned to Colonel Richards. "I'd like to inspect the perimeter with Officer Chen, alone." Both the colonel and Chief Daniels looked startled. "Sir," the colonel began, "protocol suggests that senior staff should accompany—" "I'm well aware of protocol, Colonel," the general interrupted. "I'm making an exception. Please wait here." The colonel had no choice but to agree. "Yes, sir. We'll be right here if you need anything." The general turned back to Maggie. "Lead the way, Officer Chen. Show me this depression in the fence line you mentioned." Maggie nodded and began walking toward the eastern edge of her sector. The general fell into step beside her, his cane making soft taps against the hard ground. They walked in silence until they were well out of earshot of the convoy. "The fence looks well maintained," the general commented, his voice carefully neutral. "Yes, sir. Maintenance crews inspect it weekly." The general stopped walking and turned to face her directly. "Like the maintenance worker you turned away earlier?" Maggie met his gaze steadily. "That individual was not authorized to access the relay station, sir." "So I heard." The general's eyes narrowed slightly. "Security Command was quite impressed with your adherence to protocol. Apparently, you're the only officer who's ever asked for the authorization code." Maggie said nothing, simply waiting for the next question. The general sighed, suddenly looking tired. "Do you know why I'm really touring this base, Officer Chen?" "I wouldn't presume to know the general's business, sir." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "No, you wouldn't. Not publicly, at least." He glanced around, confirming they were alone, then lowered his voice. "There's been a security breach. Intelligence suggests someone has been accessing classified communications through this base's systems." Maggie's expression remained professionally neutral. "That would explain the surveillance device on the fence post 40 meters east of my checkpoint, sir." The general's eyebrows rose. "You found a surveillance device?" "This morning, sir. I left it in place but adjusted my patrol route to monitor it more frequently." The general studied her face for a long moment. "You didn't report it?" "I was waiting to see who might come to retrieve it, sir." A genuine smile spread across the general's face. "Still the same tactical mind, I see." The smile faded, replaced by a more serious expression. "We need to talk, Captain." "But not here, not now." Maggie's only reaction to the use of her former rank was a slight tightening around her eyes. "Yes, sir." The general lowered his voice further. "I never expected to find you here. When I requested a security review of this base, your name wasn't on any roster. Officially, Margaret Chen has never served in the military, sir." "And unofficially?" Maggie met his gaze directly. "Unofficially, Captain Margaret Chen died 8 years ago in an operation that doesn't exist in any record." The general nodded slowly. "We should get back before they send a search party." He turned and began walking back toward the convoy, then paused. "I'm staying in the VIP quarters tonight, 2200 hours. That area is outside my security clearance, sir." He gave her a knowing look. "I suspect that won't be a problem for you." They returned to the waiting convoy, where Colonel Richards and Chief Daniels were trying not to look anxious about the private conversation. "Officer Chen has identified a potential security vulnerability," the general announced. "There may be unauthorized surveillance equipment on the eastern perimeter. I suggest a thorough sweep of the entire fence line immediately." Colonel Richards looked stunned. "Of course, General. We'll organize teams right away." He shot a confused glance at Maggie, clearly wondering how she had identified something his security teams had missed. The general turned to Maggie. "Thank you for your diligence, Officer Chen. Your attention to detail is commendable." "Just doing my job, sir," she replied. As the general returned to his vehicle, he paused and looked back at her. For just a moment, the years seemed to fall away, and they were in another place, another time. A classified theater of operations where a captain had led her team through enemy territory to extract a wounded colonel against impossible odds. Then the moment passed. The general entered his vehicle, and the convoy pulled away, leaving Maggie standing at her checkpoint with Colonel Richards already on his radio, ordering a security sweep of the entire perimeter. Chief Daniels approached her, his expression a mix of confusion and grudging respect. "Chen, I don't know what you said to the general, but he was impressed. He specifically requested that you be assigned to the security detail for the command building this evening." Maggie nodded. "Yes, sir. What time should I report?" 1900 hours. And Chen," he added, his voice lower, "wear a proper uniform, not the vest. You'll be inside the building." "Understood, sir." As Daniels walked away, Maggie checked her watch. She had 6 hours before her new assignment, plenty of time to prepare for whatever the general wanted to discuss at 2200 hours. Something told her that this conversation would change everything. At precisely 1900 hours, Maggie reported to the command building in a crisp navy blue security uniform. The reflective vest was gone, replaced by a professional outfit that still managed to help her blend into the background. Her hair was pulled back into a tight bun, her posture impeccable as she approached the security desk. "Chen reporting for duty," she said to the guard, who checked her name against a roster. "You're stationed in the East Corridor," the guard informed her. "Second floor outside the conference rooms. Jenkins will brief you." Maggie nodded and headed to her assigned position. The command building was buzzing with activity despite the evening hour. Officers hurried through hallways carrying folders stamped with security classifications. IT specialists moved between rooms, checking communications equipment. Something important was happening beyond the typical VIP visit. Jenkins was waiting at the top of the stairs, looking uncomfortable in his dress uniform. "Chen, you're at position 4. The general is meeting with base command staff in conference room B until 2100 hours. After that, he returns to the VIP quarters. Standard protocol. No one enters the corridor without proper clearance. Questions?" "No, sir," Maggie responded. Jenkins gave her a curious look. "What did you say to the general today?" "He specifically requested you for this detail." "I reported on security vulnerabilities in my sector, sir." Jenkins clearly wanted to ask more, but instead just shook his head. "Take your position, radio check every 30 minutes. Maggie moved to her assigned post, a spot that provided clear sightlines down both directions of the corridor while remaining somewhat inconspicuous next to a large potted plant. From this position, she could observe the entrance to Conference Room B, where animated silhouettes moved behind frosted glass. The hours passed slowly. Maggie maintained her vigilance, reporting in every 30 minutes as required. Occasionally, staff officers would emerge from the conference room, looking tense as they hurried off to retrieve requested information or make secure calls. At 21:55 hours, the conference room door opened fully. Base commanders filed out, their faces grave. Colonel Richards was the last to exit, stopping to exchange final words with someone still inside the room. He nodded sharply, then turned and noticed Maggie. "Officer Chen," he acknowledged with a nod, studying her for a moment as if seeing her for the first time. Whatever the general had told him about her had clearly changed his perception. "Sir?" Maggie replied with appropriate deference. The colonel seemed about to say something more, but instead just nodded again and continued down the hall. A moment later, General Hayes emerged from the conference room, accompanied by his aide, a sharp-looking lieutenant colonel who carried a locked briefcase. The general spotted Maggie immediately and walked over to her position. "Officer Chen, you'll be escorting me back to my quarters," he announced, loud enough for others in the corridor to hear. "Yes, sir," Maggie replied, falling into step slightly behind him, as protocol dictated. The general's aide gave her a curious look, but said nothing as they made their way through the building and out to the waiting SUV. The driver opened the rear door, and the general turned to his aide. "That will be all for tonight, Colonel. I'll see you at 0700 tomorrow." The aide looked surprised. "Sir, standard protocol requires—" "I'm well aware of protocol," the general interrupted firmly. "Officer Chen will handle security tonight. I need you fresh for tomorrow's briefings." The aide knew better than to argue. "Yes, sir. Good night, sir." The general gestured for Maggie to enter the vehicle first. Once they were both seated and the doors closed, the driver pulled away from the command building. VIP quarters, the general instructed the driver, then pressed a button to raise the privacy partition between the front and rear seats. Once they were securely isolated, the general's formal demeanor softened slightly. "I apologize for the theatrics, Captain, but I needed to speak with you privately." Maggie remained professionally composed. "I understand, sir." The general studied her face in the dim light of the car. 8 years, he said quietly. 8 years since Operation Shadowfall, since you and your team pulled me out of that hellhole. Maggie's expression didn't change, but her eyes reflected recognition of the operation name. "The mission was successful, sir." "Successful," the general repeated with a soft, humorless laugh. "Is that what they told you afterward, that it was successful?" "My team extracted the target and returned to friendly territory with minimal casualties. By mission parameters, that constitutes success." The general's expression darkened. "And after the extraction? After your team was supposedly extracted by helicopter from the border region?" Maggie's silence was answer enough. "They told me you died," the general said, his voice hard with controlled anger. "All of you. They showed me the after-action report. Helicopter shot down during extraction, no survivors." "That was the official record, sir." "But here you are," the general said, "working perimeter security at a logistics base under an identity that has no military history." Maggie finally allowed herself a small shift in expression, a tightening of her jaw. "My team completed the mission, sir. What happened afterward was beyond our control." The SUV slowed as they approached the VIP quarters, a separate building on the edge of the base reserved for distinguished visitors. The driver parked and opened the general's door. Maggie exited on her side, scanning the area automatically before falling into step beside the general as they walked to the entrance. Once inside, the general dismissed the driver and led Maggie to a small sitting room. It was sparsely furnished but comfortable, with a window overlooking the darkened base. The general gestured for her to sit, but she remained standing. "We're secure here," he said. "I had my team sweep for surveillance equipment this morning." Maggie nodded, but maintained her formal posture. "Why am I here, sir?" The general moved to a sideboard and poured 2 glasses of water. He offered one to Maggie, which she accepted with a nod. "What do you know about why I'm visiting this base?" he asked. "Only what's circulating among security personnel, sir. A routine inspection ahead of some logistical operation." The general shook his head. "Nothing routine about it. 3 weeks ago, intelligence identified this base as the source of a significant security breach. Classified information about troop movements in Eastern Europe was compromised. The leak was traced back to communication systems here." Maggie absorbed this information silently. "What makes this particularly concerning," the general continued, "is that the compromised information related to contingency plans developed by the same agency that handled your team after Operation Shadowfall." Maggie's eyes narrowed slightly. "You believe there's a connection?" "I don't believe in coincidences," the general said flatly. "I requested this inspection because I wanted to see for myself what was happening here. Finding you was unexpected." He placed his glass down and looked at her directly. "Captain, I need to know what happened to you and your team after the extraction." Maggie was silent for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was measured and precise. "After extracting you from the compound, my team proceeded to the designated extraction point. The helicopter arrived as scheduled, but when we landed at the secondary base, we were immediately separated. I was debriefed by personnel I didn't recognize, not our usual chain of command." She paused, collecting her thoughts. "They told me the mission was classified beyond top secret because it had taken place in territory where we officially had no operations. They said that officially, the mission never happened, and officially, my team and I were killed when our helicopter was shot down, returning from a training exercise in a completely different region." "They gave you new identities," the general surmised. Maggie nodded. "They gave us a choice: accept new identities in separation from service, or face charges for an unauthorized cross-border operation. They had already prepared the documentation showing we had acted without orders." The general's face darkened with anger. "They used you for a deniable operation, then threatened you when it was over." "Standard procedure for certain agencies, sir," Maggie replied without emotion, My team was scattered across different locations. I haven't had contact with any of them since that day. The general walked to the window, looking out at the darkened base. And yet, here you are, at the exact base where classified information is being compromised. Information from the same agency that buried you. I was assigned here 3 years ago, Maggie said carefully. I had no choice in the placement. The general turned back to her. Do you know who else is stationed here? From your former team? No, sir. If any of them are here, they would be under different identities, like me. The general nodded thoughtfully. The surveillance device you found today. Professional installation? Military grade, sir, not civilian. I thought so. He sat down heavily in one of the chairs, suddenly looking older than his years. Captain, I believe someone is running an unauthorized operation from this base, and I believe they are using former covert operators like yourself, people who have legitimate grievances against certain elements within our intelligence services. Maggie remained silent, her face unreadable. The question, the general continued, is whether you're part of it. Maggie met his gaze directly. With respect, sir, if I were part of an unauthorized intelligence operation, would I have reported the surveillance device? Would I have stopped the unauthorized maintenance worker from accessing the relay station? The general studied her for a long moment, then smiled slightly. No, you wouldn't have, which is exactly why I requested you for tonight's security detail. He leaned forward. Captain Chen, I need your help. Officially, you don't exist. Officially, I never met you before yesterday. This gives us an advantage. What kind of help, sir? I need to identify who's running this operation and shut it down before it compromises more than just contingency plans. But I can't use official channels because I don't know how far this goes. Maggie considered his words carefully. You're suggesting an unauthorized counterintelligence operation, sir. I'm suggesting we clean up a mess that never officially existed, the general corrected, just like Operation Shadowfall. Maggie was silent again, weighing her options. Finally, she asked, Why should I help you, sir? After what they did to my team? Because I've spent the last 8 years trying to find out what happened to the team that saved my life, the general answered quietly. Because I've been fighting against the people who buried you, and because whatever is happening here is putting American lives at risk, which is something I know you still care about, regardless of how the government treated you. Maggie's expression softened almost imperceptibly. What would this operation entail? First, we need to identify if any of your former team members are here. Second, we need to determine who's running the operation and what their ultimate objective is. The leaked information suggests they're trying to compromise NATO operations in Eastern Europe, but we don't know why. Maggie nodded slowly. I'll need access to personnel files. I can arrange that through my security clearance, but it needs to be done carefully. And if we identify the operation, what then? The general's expression hardened. Then we shut it down. And afterward, I ensure that you and any uninvolved team members receive formal recognition for Operation Shadowfall, along with full restoration of your military records and benefits. That would require acknowledging an operation that officially never happened, Maggie pointed out. I'm 4 months from retirement, Captain, the general said with a slight smile. I can afford to ruffle some feathers on my way out. For the first time, Maggie allowed herself a small smile. Then I'm at your service, General. The general stood and extended his hand. Welcome back, Captain Chen. Maggie shook his hand firmly. Sir, there's something else you should know. The maintenance worker I turned away today, his face matched one of the guards from the compound where you were held. He's aged, but I never forget a face. The general's expression turned grave. You're certain? Absolutely, sir. Then this is bigger than just a leak. They've infiltrated this base. The general checked his watch. We should end this meeting before anyone gets suspicious. Tomorrow, you'll be assigned to my security detail for the remainder of my visit. That will give us cover to continue our discussions. Maggie nodded. What about tonight, sir? If there are hostile elements on the base, your security may be compromised. I have countermeasures in place, the general assured her. And now, I have you. As Maggie prepared to leave, the general called after her. Captain, one more thing. In the 8 years since you pulled me out of that compound, I haven't had a single night without remembering your face. When I saw you standing on that tarmac yesterday, I thought I was seeing a ghost. In many ways, you were, sir. The general nodded solemnly. We're going to change that. By the time I leave this base, Margaret Chen will exist again. That's a promise. Maggie allowed herself another small smile. Then I look forward to existing again, sir. She slipped out into the night, moving silently back to her quarters. For the first time in 8 years, she felt something like hope stirring in her chest. The mission ahead would be dangerous, possibly even more dangerous than Operation Shadowfall had been. But this time, she had an ally who understood the true cost of service and sacrifice. Tomorrow, Captain Margaret Chen would begin her return from the dead, and someone on this base would learn why she had been one of the most effective covert operators in the theater, before they had tried to erase her existence.